On the morning of January 22, 1943, precisely at 9:17, Second Lieutenant John George found himself crouched low amidst the tangled ruins of a Japanese bunker, located a short distance west of Point Cruz. His eyes were focused through the scope of his rifle, fixated on a particular banyan tree approximately 240 yards away, a target his fellow officers had ridiculed and dismissed for 6 long weeks. At only 27 years of age, George had already made a name for himself as an Illinois state champion marksman, yet he had 0 confirmed kills to his record. The enemy, Japanese soldiers, had assigned 11 snipers to operate within the dense groves surrounding Point Cruz, and in just the past 3 days, they had managed to eliminate 14 soldiers from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. Despite the peril, George's commanding officer had dismissed his rifle as a mere toy, mocking its appearance and presumed fragility. The other leaders of the platoons observed it with derision, humorously referring to it as his mail-order sweetheart, a nickname that underscored their skepticism about its effectiveness in combat. The rifle in question was a Winchester Model 70, fitted with a Lyman Alaskan scope and mounted on a Griffin and Howe mount, which George had carefully unpacked at Camp Forest in Tennessee. When the armorer first saw it, he questioned whether this rifle was intended for deer hunting or for killing Germans, hinting at a dismissive attitude. George patiently explained that it was meant for Japanese soldiers, emphasizing its precision purpose. Unfortunately, by the time the rifle had arrived, the unit had already shipped out, leaving George to spend the voyage to Guadalcanal watching other soldiers clean their Garand rifles, while his own weapon languished in a warehouse back in Illinois. Determined, George requested that his prized firearm be forwarded through the military mail system. After 6 long weeks, by late December of 1942, a supply sergeant finally handed him a sturdy wooden crate, carefully labeled fragile. Inside, wrapped in protective padding, was the rifle he had diligently saved 2 years of his National Guard pay to afford. Weighing roughly 9 pounds, the rifle was a sleek and precise tool. The scope added another 12 ounces, transforming the weapon into a specialized shooting instrument. To put this into perspective, every other soldier in his battalion carried a standard issue rifle that weighed about 9.5 pounds, without any magnification or scope. George's particular rifle was a bolt-action, capable of firing 5 rounds before needing to be reloaded, whereas the standard Imanus 1 Garand was semi-automatic, equipped with an 8-round magazine. Captain Morris, the commanding officer, ordered George to leave what he called his sporting rifle in the tent, insisting he carry a more reliable, standard-issue firearm in combat. Nevertheless, George refused to part with his chosen weapon, opting to carry it into the dangerous jungle that stretched around Point Cruz. By late December of 1942, the 132nd Infantry had taken over from the Marines, who had been fighting in the area since August. The Marines had successfully captured and secured Henderson Field, but had failed to seize Mount Austin or completely clear the Japanese from the coastal groves that lay to the west of the Matanacaw River. This mountain, standing an imposing 1,514 feet tall, was known to the Japanese as the Gu. They fortified it with approximately 500 troops and constructed 47 bunkers, turning it into a formidable stronghold. On December 17th, George's battalion launched their assault, engaging in a brutal 16-day battle. The fighting was fierce and relentless. The soldiers suffered the loss of 34 men killed in action and saw 279 wounded before finally managing to seize control of the western slope on the 2nd of January. Throughout this entire period, George had yet to fire his Winchester even once in combat. He had been present at the fighting, but his shot had not been needed or called upon. The jungle terrain surrounding Point Cruz, however, was a notably different environment from the open, fortified positions on Mount Austin. There, the Japanese soldiers had retreated from Henderson Field and clandestinely dug into the dense, towering trees, making use of the jungle's natural cover. Some of these soldiers were skilled snipers, armed with scoped Arisaka Type 98 rifles. They knew the jungle intimately, the way to hide, wait patiently, and strike with deadly efficiency. On January 19th, at a creek where soldiers were filling their water canteens, a Japanese sniper managed to shoot and kill Corporal Davis. The very next day, Another sniper's deadly shot accounted for 2 men from L Company during a routine patrol. The following day, 3 more soldiers fell to enemy snipers, one of whom was shot through the neck from behind a tree that the patrol had twice passed without realizing. That night, the battalion commander summoned George to his command post. His expression was grave and urgent. The deadly efficiency of Japanese snipers was killing his men at a pace that rivaled the toll of malaria. Casualties were mounting rapidly, and clear leadership was urgently needed. The commander turned to George and expressed his concern that perhaps his reliable, mail-ordered rifle could finally help turn the tide. He wanted to know if the rifle that had been purchased at such a personal expense and effort could genuinely hit anything in this hostile, unpredictable environment. It was a critical question. Could that precise and carefully chosen weapon, which had been simply a dream for years, prove effective in the deadly game of jungle warfare? George carefully recounted his credentials, emphasizing his remarkable achievements early in his life. In the year 1939, he had won the Illinois State Championship shooting at a distance of precisely 1,000 yards, a feat that drew considerable attention at the time. At just 23 years old, he had become the youngest person in the entire history of the state to claim this prestigious title. Not only that, but he had demonstrated extraordinary precision in the field of long-range shooting. At 600 yards, using iron sights, he managed to cluster his shots remarkably close together, showcasing his mastery with the rifle. Additionally, he successfully engaged targets at 300 yards with a lineman Alaskan rifle, firing 5 rounds, each within 4 inches of each other, an impressive demonstration of skill given the challenging conditions. His commanding officer gave him an overnight challenge to prove his prowess, setting a high bar for the young marksman to meet before dawn. If you're interested in understanding how George's civilian service rifle stood up against the fierce and highly trained Japanese snipers operating in jungle warfare, consider noticing that feeling of suspense. Showing your support by engaging with this content, such as clicking like, helps us bring more stories like George's out of obscurity and into the light. Such stories remind us of the resilience and ingenuity of individuals in extraordinary circumstances. And if you haven't already done so, subscribing ensures you won't miss other compelling narratives from history and beyond. Now, returning focus to George's night of preparation. He dedicated hours to inspecting his rifle, which had been tightly packed in cosmoline, a grease used to protect firearms during long sea voyages, making it necessary to clean and service it once again. He meticulously checked the scope mounts to ensure stability and reliability. The rifle he relied on was a Winchester chambered for a .30-06 cartridge, which he had brought with him from Tennessee. This was the same caliber used by military rifles like the M1 Garand, giving him a sense of familiarity and confidence in the weapon's performance. He loaded 5 rounds of hunting ammunition, which were actually military ball rounds, specifically designed for combat and proven to be effective. As dawn approached on the 22nd of January, George moved silently into position amid the ruins of a Japanese bunker, which his battalion had captured just 3 days earlier. The strategic location overlooked lush coconut groves to the west of Point Cruz. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese snipers were operating from the large banyan trees in that very area, a dense jungle of towering foliage, some reaching heights of nearly 90 feet, with trunks measuring 8 feet across. These colossal trees provided ideal vantage points. A trained sniper could carefully ascend before dawn and remain hidden all day, blending seamlessly into the canopy. George had not brought a spotter or radio man with him, only his trusty rifle, a canteen for hydration, and 60 rounds of ammunition stored in stripper clips, which allowed for quick reloading. He settled himself properly in the bunker, positioning his scope to scan the treetops carefully. His scope, the Lyman Alaskan, provided a modest 2.5 times magnification, not extensive, but sufficient to detect subtle movements in the dense branches that could easily escape unaided eyes. The jungle around him was rarely silent. The cacophony of birds, insects, and the distant echo of artillery fire created a constant symphony of sounds. Over time, George had learned to tune out background noise, honing his ability to focus solely on any signs of movement that might betray a sniper's position. He swept his gaze slowly across the treetops, from left to right, top to bottom, searching meticulously. Suddenly, At exactly 9:17 in the morning, he saw it. A tiny movement on a branch. No wind was stirring the leaves, only a slight, deliberate shift. It was high up, approximately 87 feet into an enormous banyan tree, positioned about 240 yards from his vantage point. George's trained eyes locked onto it as he observed further. The branch moved again, confirming his suspicions. Then he spotted the figure, a man dressed in dark clothing, crouched in a natural fork where three large branches converged, creating a subtle perch. The sniper was facing eastward, carefully watching the trail where George's battalion had been moving supplies, a prime observation point for an adversary. Without hesitation, George adjusted his scope slightly, making a two-click correction to the right to account for the slight wind drift and other variables. He took a deep breath, controlling his breathing to steady his hands and calm his nerves. His trigger pull was exquisite. He had spent countless hours, including precise adjustments made at Camp Perry before the war, ensuring the trigger broke cleanly at about 32 pounds of force. Now, with all that experience behind him, he prepared to see if his civilian target rifle could deliver a lethal shot against a man trained for the kill, an enemy who had the advantage of position, camouflage, and training. As he gently squeezed the trigger, the Winchester responded with a smooth but forceful recoil, the sound cracking through the jungle's dense atmosphere. The shot echoed across the quiet jungle, reaching its target perfectly, 240 yards away. The sniper jerked involuntarily, and within moments, he lost his balance and tumbled downward, falling through the branches of the banyan tree. His body struck the ground near the base of the enormous tree, the impact silent but deadly, ending the threat. George promptly worked the bolt of his rifle, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. His eyes remained fixed on the tree, vigilant for any sign of movement from the sniper's partner, knowing that such skilled enemies often worked in pairs, one to shoot, the other to observe and call back information. He knew his task was far from over and stayed alert, waiting for any sign that another threat might emerge from the shadows of the jungle canopy. Had George managed to eliminate the shooter in that tense moment, the spotlight would still have been focused on the unseen spotter lurking somewhere within the thick branches of that very same tree, or possibly hiding amidst the dense foliage of nearby trees. With unwavering concentration, George carefully swept his gaze across the lush, sprawling canopy of banyan trees surrounding him. The magnification of his scope, set at only 2.5 power, meant that every slight movement or shadow required painstaking, deliberate observation, forcing him to proceed with patience and precision. Every tree could potentially conceal multiple enemies, and the jungle's canopy, dense and shadowed, created complex patterns of light and dark, shapes that could easily deceive even the most vigilant eyes without meticulous scrutiny. At exactly 9:43, after a tense period of scanning and waiting, George identified the second sniper, positioned in a different tree approximately 60 yards to the north of the first. This new threat was situated lower in its perch, roughly 50 feet above the ground, suggesting a careful choice of position for concealment and stability. The Japanese soldier in that tree was clearly aware that he had been seen. He was moving downward along the trunk, instinctively retreating in response to the danger. Recognizing his movement, George swiftly aligned his crosshairs, carefully leading his shot to account for the sniper's movement, then confidently fired. The second assassin tumbled backwards off the tree, his body falling through the branches with an unsettling rustle. His rifle clattered onto the forest floor below, disturbing the quiet air. Both snipers struck the ground within moments of each other, two precise kills in rapid succession, underscoring George's sharp skill and composure. Without hesitation, George reloaded his Winchester rifle, sliding a stripper clip into place with methodical efficiency. His hands remained steady, controlled by years of disciplined training. His breathing slowed and steadied, allowing him to focus entirely on the task at hand. This routine was familiar, reminiscent of marksmanship competitions at Camp Perry, where the targets did not return fire and patience determined success. But in this jungle battlefield, every shot could be met with deadly retaliation. At 11:21, a sudden, sharp crack echoed through the dense foliage. A Japanese bullet struck the sandbag placed just 6 inches from George's head, causing a spray of dirt and debris to burst into his face. Reacting instinctively, he rolled to his left and pressed his body against the rough wall of his bunker, the sudden attack confirming that he was no longer hidden from the enemy's sight. The shot had come from the southwest, a different direction from the previous two snipers, indicating a new threat had taken position elsewhere. Recognizing the danger, George remained still for 3 tense minutes, patiently waiting for the hostile fire to cease before cautiously inching his way back to his original firing position. He then turned his gaze toward the southwest, carefully glassing the thick trees for any sign of movement, knowing that in such a dense jungle, a sniper would almost certainly have moved after firing. The classic sniper tactic of shooting and then relocating, a strategy intended to make counterfire difficult. Then, at exactly 11:38, after meticulous observation, George spotted him, positioned in the third tree from the left in a cluster of 5 banyans, approximately 73 feet above the ground. The Japanese sniper had moved to a different branch of the same tree, but his position remained fundamentally the same. That was a mistake, George understood instantly. Calmly, he placed the crosshairs on the dark silhouette of the enemy and pulled the trigger. The third sniper was struck silently, without any obvious reaction, collapsing instantly from his perch in the treetop. By midday, George had successfully taken out 5 Japanese snipers, each in different covert positions. Word quickly spread through the battalion about his remarkable marksmanship. Soldiers who had previously scoffed at the idea of relying on a mail-order rifle now approached him with a mixture of curiosity and respect, asking if they could observe his method during his next engagement. George, mindful of the danger of drawing attention, refused their requests. He understood that an audience could be a liability, drawing unnecessary focus and potentially revealing his position or attracting enemy fire. After the 5th kill, the Japanese adversaries adapted to George's tactics. They ceased moving openly during daylight hours, likely realizing that their previous method of shifting positions after firing was no longer effective against such a sharpshooter. Throughout the afternoon, George kept vigil among the trees, diligently glassing the forest in search of movement or signs of a new sniper, but saw nothing. As the clock approached 4 o'clock in the afternoon, George returned to the battalion headquarters, where Captain Morris awaited him. The captain's tone, once filled with vague mockery, had become serious. The once joking attitude was replaced by a tone of respect. Morris issued a direct order for George to be back in position at dawn the following day, underscoring the importance of his role and the need for continued vigilance. On the morning of January 23rd, heavy tropical rain began pouring down, transforming the jungle floor into a thick, muddy mess. The relentless downpour made visibility beyond 100 yards almost impossible and rendered the leafy canopy above a near-impenetrable wall of water and greenery. George sat quietly inside his bunker, patiently waiting for the rain to subside, knowing that patience was crucial in such conditions. Eventually, around 8:15, the rain ceased, and by 8:45, enough visibility had returned to permit effective observation and shooting. Soon after, at approximately 9:12, George spotted the first sniper of that day. This enemy had evidently seized his vantage point during the rainstorm, when sound was muffled and movement could be concealed behind the torrential downpour. His choice of position was notably shrewd, located in a tree 290 yards away, a longer range than any previous shot, demonstrating that the Japanese were adapting and learning from earlier encounters. Recognizing the increased distance, George carefully compensated for the greater range and took the shot, instructing his scope's crosshairs onto the shadowy figure. The sniper was swiftly and silently brought down, his accuracy reaffirming George's formidable reputation as a sniper in the jungle's unforgiving terrain. The 6th elimination caught George entirely off guard, sparking a reaction he had not foreseen. It was nearly 10 o'clock in the morning, 95 minutes past 9, to be precise, when the unmistakable sound of Japanese mortars suddenly erupted around his bunker. As he loaded his rifle with 5 fresh rounds, readying himself for the dawn, George struggled to find sleep. Eventually, at around 3 o'clock in the morning, fatigue won, and he gave up attempting to rest. Sitting in his tent, he rested the rifle across his lap, vigilantly alert for any movement. The rain resumed softly at 4:15, pattering against the tent fabric and gradually intensifying into a heavy downpour by dawn. By 5:30, the persistent rain made it impossible to conduct any operations, forcing him to delay his plan to strike again. Rather than remain in the same position, which the enemy could now be watching, George took this as an opportunity to shift to a new spot, one less expected and more advantageous for his purposes. He ventured approximately 70 yards south of his previous hideout, choosing instead a cluster of large rocks that the Marines had previously used as a machine gun nest back in December. This new position offered solid cover and an excellent field of overlapping fire across the groves, giving him a strategic advantage. As the rain subsided into a light drizzle around 7:43 in the morning, visibility improved, allowing George to focus his binoculars once more on the trees and foliage. By the exact moment of 8:17 on that January 24th, he spotted his ninth sniper, a Japanese soldier hidden in a palm tree located about 190 yards away. The sniper's position was unusual. He was situated only roughly 40 feet above ground, a low perch compared to the usual high vantage points preferred by snipers. Most would climb high into the trees to gain better sight lines, but this soldier had opted for concealment through the dense fronds of the palm rather than elevation. This choice favored stealth over height, making him less conspicuous from ground level. However, from George's elevated position on the rocks, he had an unobstructed downward view into the palm's foliage, seeing the dark silhouette of the sniper's shoulders and head clearly outlined against the lighter sky. With precision and patience, George prepared himself to take the shot, fully aware that this new challenge demanded the same calm focus that had brought him so much success thus far. George's focus was absolute. He took a deep, steadying breath, carefully controlled his heartbeat, and slowly began to squeeze the trigger of his rifle. But abruptly, he froze, mid-action. Something felt off. His instincts prickled with a sense that all was not as it seemed. He hesitated, realizing that his position was too exposed, too simplistic to be real. It was then that he remembered he had been on a relentless pursuit of snipers over the past 3 days, during which he had taken down 8 of them. The remaining 3 snipers, he understood, would not make naive, elementary mistakes like this. They were seasoned, careful marksmen who wouldn't position themselves where an elevated shooter could spot them unless it was a deliberate setup, perhaps baiting a trap. With a deliberate movement, George lowered his rifle to the ground and began scanning the surrounding treetops with a methodical, calm eye. If the sniper in the palm tree was indeed a decoy, then the real shooter would be stationed nearby, ready to cover his teammates' movements. It would be watching the palm, poised to react instantly if anyone took a shot or if the bait was triggered. He knew the real threat was probably waiting in ambush, concealed behind layers of foliage, anticipating George's move. George's gaze swept across the trees, meticulous in his search, examining one after another from left to right, then from top to bottom. He scrutinized every possible hiding spot within a radius of 300 yards from the palm. This intense, detailed scan took him 11 minutes. Finally, at 8:28, he spotted the genuine sniper. It was a banyan tree situated roughly 80 yards to the northwest of the palm and perched high up, approximately 91 feet. The sniper, a Japanese marksman, had chosen an ideal concealment. Its branches and vines shielded him from 3 sides, providing a perfect vantage point to observe and strike. From this elevated position, he had a clear, unobstructed line of sight toward the area where George's previous position had been, by the fallen tree. The sniper was patiently waiting, either for George to appear at the fallen tree, or for him to take another shot at the decoy in the palm, confident in the concealment provided by his vantage point. This presented George with 2 critical dilemmas. First, the sniper's vantage point was deliberately misleading. If George chose to fire now, the loud bang would almost certainly reveal his actual position. The sniper, hearing the shot, would likely instantly relocate, moving to a new concealed spot long before George could work the bolt of his rifle and chamber another round. Second, remaining silent was equally risky. If George did nothing, the sniper might eventually realize that George was not at the fallen tree and would start searching for him more actively, closing in on his real location. Faced with this peril, George decided to turn the situation to his advantage. He opted to use the bait, the decoy sniper in the palm tree, as a trap to lure out the real threat. Carefully, he aimed his rifle at the decoy in the palm, making adjustments for the wind to ensure accuracy. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the oppressive silence, causing the fake sniper to jerk violently and tumble from the branch, falling out of sight. In that split second, George calmly swung his rifle toward the banyan tree where the genuine sniper was perched, around 91 feet up in the canopy. He understood that the real sniper would respond to the gunfire. The sound would draw his attention and prompt him to react. George's plan was to detect this movement, any slight shift or repositioning, and use that to pinpoint the sniper's exact location. He watched intently, and it was there, an almost imperceptible shift in the sniper's stance, a subtle realignment to face the newly fired shot. Quickly, George put his crosshairs directly on the dark silhouette in the tree and fired before the sniper could completely turn to face him. The shot found its mark. The sniper's body was knocked backward, falling from his hide beside the branches, his rifle tumbling after him. It was a clean, efficient kill, 2 shots, 2 enemies eliminated. However, this tactical success came at a cost. In the process of firing and reconnoitering, George had inadvertently exposed his own position to anyone observing the area. Recognizing the urgency of escape, he swiftly grabbed his rifle and remaining ammunition, then broke into a run. Moving eastward along a rocky outcrop, he dropped down into a drainage ditch about 40 yards away, pressing himself into the muddy embankment and remaining motionless. He lay in wait, blending into the environment. At precisely 8:24, sound erupted from behind him, Japanese machine gun fire ripping across the rocks where he had been just seconds earlier. The bullets kicked up dust, fragments of stone, and bits of vegetation, illustrating how the enemy had found his previous position and was now attempting to eliminate him. The gunfire persisted for 17 seconds, a relentless barrage designed to pin him down. When it finally ceased, George took a full minute to be sure it was safe before he moved again. Carefully, he shifted his position, this time retreating to a location about 100 yards east. He found a shell crater, partially filled with rainwater, which he quickly utilized as a hideout. He lowered himself into the crater, water up to his chest, becoming almost invisible amidst the muddy surroundings. Resting his Winchester rifle on the rim of the crater, he resumed observing the surrounding trees with his binoculars. His mind was sharp and focused. He had taken 10 confirmed kills so far, with only 1 remaining. The final sniper was expected to be the most capable, probably the best, most intelligent, and most experienced among them. This sniper had witnessed the death of 10 of his comrades over those 3 drawn-out days. He had observed George's tactics closely, knew the capabilities of his weapon, and was aware of the approximate area where George was hiding. But the final target, the 11th sniper, was no ordinary opponent. He was likely to be a master of concealment and patience, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the midst of the dense, shadowy foliage, there was silence. Yet underneath that quiet exterior lurked an intense and calculated tension. Somewhere hidden among the tangled branches and thick canopy, the enemy sniper was stealthily observing, patiently waiting for his moment to strike, diligently planning his next move. George, the soldier on the ground, was carefully scanning the jungle with his scope, his eyes meticulously analyzing every shape and shadow that appeared in his field of vision. The powerful magnification of his Lyman Alaskan scope transformed distant, indistinct forms into recognizable silhouettes, though they still remained unidentifiable. Each dark patch that seemed to blend into the foliage could either be a protruding branch or perhaps the lurking figure of a man, concealed among the undergrowth. Because of this ambiguity, George had to scrutinize each one with absolute precision, knowing that a single misread could be fatal. It was now just before 10:47 in the morning when George finally recognized a critical mistake he had made. The danger was not coming from the sniper who was perched high in the trees, as most would assume. Instead, the assailant was on the ground, moving deliberately and quietly toward George's position. George's peripheral vision caught a movement at the edge of his sight, approximately 60 yards to the south and close to the ground level. There, a shape was shifting through the dense undergrowth, moving parallel to the line of trees. It was clear the Japanese sniper was using the natural cover provided by the jungle floor, composing of ferns, twisting vines, and fallen branches, to remain hidden. This man was crawling steadily toward George's last known location, which was marked by a cluster of rocks, all the while employing every trick of concealment the terrain could afford him. Meanwhile, George himself remained perfectly still, lying in the water-filled crater that provided him with a sort of natural refuge. His finger was lightly resting on the trigger of his Winchester rifle, already shouldered and aimed. His breathing was slow and controlled, crucial to maintaining steadiness, but the angle he needed to take was complicated. The rim of the crater obstructed his view of the creeping enemy. To see his target properly, he would have to rise slightly, exposing himself before he could take the shot. That was a calculated risk, one he hesitated to take. He knew that to move would also mean revealing his position, risking giving away his exact location. The Japanese sniper paused in his movement at approximately 10 minutes and 52 seconds, having reached a position about 40 yards away from the rocks. George continued watching intently through his scope. The sniper was now carefully scrutinizing the rocks ahead, seemingly searching for any signs of movement, any flicker of a target. The silence persisted, a testament to the patience required for a sniper's craft. Shearing through impatience and impulsiveness, patience was the most vital skill to master in this line of work. It was the ability to stand perfectly still, to wait for the optimal moment when a shot would be most effective, rather than forcing an attempt that might be a mistake. Sometimes, waiting just a few additional seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Almost as if sensing or perhaps responding to the tense stillness, at about 10 minutes 58 seconds, the Japanese sniper resumed his crawl, advancing another 35 yards from the rocks. His movement was slow but deliberate, approaching from the south as he had on his initial approach, covering the distance in a series of measured, careful movements, 30 yards, then 25 yards. This pattern suggested he was working along the side of the terrain that George had previously used to evacuate under fire from a machine gun's burst, indicating he was intelligently studying and mimicking George's tactics. It was evident that the enemy was not merely searching aimlessly, but was employing a calculated strategy. He knew that George had moved to the east after the initial attack, and was now methodically working along the most probable route of escape. By the time the clock marked 10 o'clock and 3 minutes, the sniper reached the rocks and slipped into a concealed position within the machine gun nest, turning to face eastward, aiming toward the drainage ditch and the zone where George had intended to retreat. From this vantage point, he was approximately 38 yards from George's actual position, hidden within the crater filled with water, yet his orientation was misleading. He was looking away from the most probable location of George's current position. His back was exposed and vulnerable, aligning with the possibility that this was a deliberate decoy, a bait meant to lure George into making a mistake. Despite having a clear line of sight and an excellent shot opportunity, center mass at 38 yards even without considerable scope support, George hesitated. He knew this sniper had survived 10 days of relentless American operations within the Point Cruz groves, outlasting 10 other snipers who had fallen to mistakes made in the heat of combat. This enemy was no novice. He was seasoned, meticulous, and deadly accurate. George understood that this opponent was unlikely to make the kind of careless error that would reveal his position. The spot among the rocks was too exposed for a sniper of such experience. Any moment spent there was a risk he could be spotted or targeted. Most likely, it was a carefully staged deception, a pose designed to tempt George into revealing himself or making an impulsive move. While keeping the sniper in the rocks within his scope, George's awareness expanded beyond just the immediate target. He cast a keen eye over the surrounding terrain, searching for any signs of accomplices or additional threats. If this was indeed a decoy, then the true danger would be hiding somewhere nearby, a position with a clear line of sight to whoever took the bait. Such a setup would be logical. A skilled sniper would employ a decoy to lure the enemy into a trap. At precisely 10 minutes and 6 seconds, his suspicions were confirmed. His eyes spotted movement behind a fallen tree trunk located approximately 70 yards northwest of the rocks. It was another Japanese soldier, carefully positioned in the shadows, watching and waiting. The situation was increasingly complex. Every piece of the terrain might conceal an enemy, and every movement could be a carefully calculated part of a larger plan. With this discovery, George knew that he had to stay alert, patient, and ready to adapt to the unfolding scenario, aware that the real threat might be lurking just out of immediate sight, hidden within the labyrinth of jungle vegetation. The soldier remained completely still, unmoving, as if frozen in time, deliberately watching the scene unfold around him while patiently waiting for the right moment. His rifle was tightly aimed towards the drainage ditch where he suspected George was concealed, yet he saw only one figure. No, correction, there were two figures behind the cover. It was clear that the 11th sniper had brought additional support or backup, possibly reinforcing the initial team. Alternatively, these two armed men might have represented the last of the sniper team, numbered 10 and 11, working diligently in tandem to eliminate their target. George faced a difficult decision. He understood that attempting to shoot both enemies simultaneously was impractical. His weapon, a bolt-action Winchester, necessitated manual operation of the bolt between shots, which meant he couldn't fire rapidly without exposing himself to danger. Any quick succession of shots would give the snipers enough time to react, locate his position, and unleash a counterattack. Realizing this, George understood he needed to change his tactics to increase his chances of survival. Slowly, he began to lower his body deeper into the water, carefully submerging until only his eyes and the very top of his head remained visible above the surface. Throughout this movement, he maintained his grip on the rifle and kept its barrel pointed skyward to prevent water from entering and jamming the weapon, an essential precaution. Now, submerged and hidden from sight, he decided to bide his time. It was exactly 10:13 in the morning when the soldier in the rocky outcrop finally rose to his feet. Having spent 10 minutes meticulously observing the drainage ditch, he had seen nothing suspicious and was convinced George had moved further east. Without hesitation, he signaled to his unseen partner behind the fallen tree, and both men initiated a movement eastward, each about 70 yards apart, maintaining a steady, parallel course. Their purpose was clear. They were conducting a search pattern, either aiming to flush George out into the open or, more likely, trying to locate his precise position. Meanwhile, George remained perfectly still in the water, motionless and quiet, blending into his environment. The two Japanese soldiers passed by his crater, gradually moving past him. Their backs were now exposed, which presented an opportunity. With utmost care and silence, George slowly rose from the water, his body submerged just enough to avoid detection. Carefully, deliberately, he brought his Winchester to his shoulder. Water dripped from the barrel, from his uniform, from his face, a sign of the tense stillness surrounding him. He fixed his aim on the closest soldier, the one who had been stationed in the rocks and was now about 42 yards away. With precision, George fired. The soldier crumpled instantly, collapsing to the ground. In the same breath, George manipulated the bolt of his rifle, chambering a fresh round, preparing for the next shot. Turning his rifle toward the second soldier who was, at that moment, beginning to turn and raise his own rifle in response, George fired again. This time, the second enemy soldier also fell, bringing the total tally of his lethal engagements to 11 shots fired over the span of 3 days. These 11 shots had resulted in the death of 11 Japanese snipers, effectively neutralizing a threat that had infiltrated and provoked deadly ambushes. Consequently, George had successfully cleared the point and the surrounding groves of men who had posed a lethal danger, a danger that had already claimed the lives of 14 Americans in a mere 72 hours. However, as George slowly climbed out of the crater and bent down to retrieve the spent cartridges, a sudden sound caused a chilling sense of alertness. It was the unmistakable noise of voices, Japanese voices, emerging from the tree line. They were speaking in hurried tones, and he could hear the movements of multiple men approaching the fallen soldier's position. Despite having eliminated the snipers, George realized that those unfortunate men had not been acting alone. There was likely a backup or reinforcement coming to recover the bodies and continue the mission. Reacting swiftly, George dropped back into the water, feeling the cold, muddy substance enveloping him. He submerged completely, leaving only his eyes visible above the water's surface. Holding his Winchester vertically, he ensured the barrel remained clear of water, maintaining silence and concealment. The sound of voices grew louder. At least 6 men, perhaps more, moving deliberate steps in the direction of the slain snipers. He listened intently as he heard branches cracking underfoot, equipment rattling slightly as these soldiers moved through the terrain. These were not sneaky snipers, but rather infantry troops, possibly a patrol or a team tasked with recovering the fallen bodies. George strained to count the seconds in his mind, attentive to the subtle clues that would tell him more. He overheard the voices pause briefly at the location of the first corpse, which was approximately 42 yards from his crater, close enough for him to clearly hear their words, even though he did not understand the language. Then, the conversation shifted as they moved to the second body, exchanging urgent, hurried tones, perhaps giving instructions or passing information. At precisely 10:28 in the morning, the voices resumed their movement away from the fallen soldiers, no longer heading toward the tree line where George was hiding, but instead advancing in the direction of his crater. Every second was crucial for his survival. He remained silently immersed in the muddy water, listening to the footsteps grow faint as the soldiers moved further away, yet he knew that the danger was far from over. They had finally uncovered the trail, discovering fresh boot prints pressed deep into the muddy ground, leading away from the jagged rocks towards the edge of the crater. Every detail of George's movements had been deliberate. He had taken care to move quietly, minimizing noise and avoiding detection. Yet, he had overlooked one critical element: his tracks. He was acutely aware that his firearm, a Winchester rifle, held only 5 rounds, while the enemy, a minimum of 6 Japanese soldiers, was armed and possibly dangerous. Facing such unfavorable odds with a bolt-action rifle made his situation all the more perilous. Pondering his options, George weighed the 2 primary choices before him. Either conceal himself, remaining hidden in hopes that the soldiers would pass by without discovering him, or choose to fight back, risking exposure but attempting to fend off his pursuers. Gradually, he heard the muffled voices of the approaching enemy gaining momentum, closing in steadily. The distant steps grew louder, 30 yards, then 25, then just 20. The tension mounted, and at 10 minutes and 31 seconds past the hour, a soldier emerged at the crater's rim, his gaze directly locked onto George's position. Their eyes met across the intervening space in a fleeting but accusatory glance. Instantly, George reacted by firing from within the water. The shot echoed through the dense jungle, and the soldier at the rim was knocked backward, tumbling down the slope. Without hesitation, George managed to operate the bolt of his rifle while still submerged, chambering another round. He then rose abruptly from his hiding spot, ready for action. As he emerged, he saw 2 more soldiers standing at the rim, their eyes scanning for movement. He fired at the closest, then worked the bolt again, firing once more before both of those soldiers fell to the ground. Now, only 3 rounds remained in his rifle. The noise had attracted more attention. George could hear shouting and commands carried on the wind, and soon, more Japanese soldiers were moving rapidly toward his position. Recognizing the danger of being overwhelmed, he decided to break cover. Carefully, he climbed out of the crater on the north side, away from the direction from which the voices were approaching, and sprinted 20 yards through the thick undergrowth. He swiftly took refuge behind a fallen, weathered tree as the crack of Japanese rifles pierced the humid jungle air. Bullets whined past him, striking the dirt and splinters of wood around the fallen tree, missing by mere inches. The soldiers, evidently firing at any sign of movement or sound, were not aiming carefully but rather indiscriminately, attempting to flush him out from his hiding spot. Remaining low and concealed, George brought up his binoculars and peered through the scope of his rifle, seeking signs of movement. And sure enough, he spotted 2 soldiers advancing cautiously toward the crater's vicinity, now only about 50 yards away. With a steady hand, he aimed at the leading soldier, took a deep breath, and fired. The shot struck its target, and the soldier dropped instantly. The second soldier lunged for cover behind a tree, as George's second round raked through the space where he had just been. He had only 2 rounds left. Behind him, distant voices indicated that the Japanese had begun to flank him from multiple directions, one contingent approaching from the south, another from the east. Recognizing the grim reality that he was close to being encircled, George understood that continuing a direct confrontation would be futile. He could not hope to win a firefight with limited ammunition against an enemy armed with semi-automatic rifles. His only chance was to break away, retreat toward the American lines, and avoid being captured or killed. With that in mind, George grasped his rifle firmly and turned northward, launching into a sprint through the tangled jungle undergrowth. The vines clung to his boots, causing him to stumble slightly, while branches whipped at his face and arms as he pushed forward at full speed. Behind him, the crack of Japanese rifles persisted as bullets shot past, striking trees and kicking up dirt in his wake. He kept running for approximately 90 seconds before he spotted a dry shell crater nearby. Without hesitation, he dove into it, pressing his body against the crater's damp, muddy wall to conceal his presence. As he lay there silently listening, the distant sounds of the enemy grew fainter, indicating that they had halted their pursuit and were likely regrouping around their fallen comrades. George carefully checked his weapon, noting mud caked onto the stock and water still dripping from the barrel, a reminder of his hurried escape. With only 2 rounds remaining and no extra clips at hand, he understood that he had limited ammunition. The clips were stored in his backpack, which, in the chaos, was somewhere near that waterlogged crater. At 10 minutes before 11 in the morning, George resumed his cautious movement, choosing to walk rather than run, staying low and using the terrain to stay concealed. He moved in a northeastern direction, aiming to reach the safety of the American lines. The jungle around him was eerily silent now, devoid of voices or movement, replaced by only the steady rhythm of his own breathing and the distant low rumble of artillery fire, a constant reminder of the ongoing battle. By 11 minutes past 11, George finally reached the perimeter defended by American troops. A Marine sentry quickly challenged him, demanding identification. Recognizing each other, George identified himself promptly, and the sentry guided him safely through the checkpoint. He then proceeded to a nearby battalion headquarters, where he reported to Captain Morris. Captain Morris listened intently as George recounted the harrowing encounter in detail, providing a full debrief. Over the course of those 4 days, George had managed to eliminate or disable a total of 11 Japanese snipers, an impressive feat considering the perilous circumstances. In the tense moments of combat, 12 shots were fired in quick succession at enemy snipers, with 11 of those shots hitting their intended targets. After this precise and effective engagement, the firefight quickly shifted to a broader conflict involving infantry soldiers. During this intense exchange, 3 additional enemies were neutralized, bringing the total number of enemy combatants eliminated in that single episode to 5. This entire exchange, which involved firing a mere 5 rounds, demonstrated the precision and resolve of the soldiers involved. Following the combat, Morris, a commanding officer or perhaps a fellow soldier, inquired about the remaining ammunition supplies. George, who was present at that moment, reported that he only had 2 rounds left for his rifle. Concerned about the condition and operational status of George's weapon, Morris then asked about the rifle itself. George responded that the firearm was still functional but acknowledged it needed cleaning. He explained that dirt, mud, and debris had infiltrated the weapon during the rough conditions, with mud clogging the action and water seeping into the barrel. Morris, understanding the importance of maintaining their weapons, instructed George to clean his rifle and take a rest phase, since there would be no upcoming operational plans for the following day. Meanwhile, the battalion was preparing to move eastward, redirecting their focus. The original objective of patrolling and engaging enemy fighters in the Point Cruz groves was no longer a priority because the Japanese forces had begun evacuating the Guadalcanal area. Intelligence reports indicated that the Japanese were planning to complete their withdrawal within approximately 2 weeks, which influenced the shift in operational focus for the American forces. Later, George retreated to his tent and began the meticulous process of disassembling his Winchester rifle. He dedicated the next 2 hours to thoroughly cleaning every individual component, applying cosmoline and gun oil meticulously to prevent rust and ensure smooth operation. Patches were carefully run through the barrel repeatedly until they emerged completely clean, signaling that the bore was free of dirt and residue. He also inspected the scope mounts, making minor adjustments to the eye relief to ensure optimal accuracy. After reassembling the rifle, George loaded it with 5 fresh rounds, preparing for whatever might come next. At exactly 1400 hours, a message was delivered from the division headquarters, summoning George to a meeting with the battalion commander. Walking toward headquarters, George's mind raced with thoughts. He wondered if Morris had already filed a negative report, criticizing his actions. Such a report might have cited unauthorized engagement, excessive expenditure of ammunition, or operating independently without proper support. Yet, when he arrived, he was surprised to find Morris awaiting him along with two other officers, one of whom was Colonel Ferry, the commanding officer of the regiment. Colonel Ferry's sole question was straightforward but significant. Could George train other men to perform the kind of precise, disciplined shooting he had demonstrated in combat? George responded that he was willing to try, but he emphasized that it would require time, suitable equipment such as rifles with scopes, and soldiers who were already proficient marksmen. Ferry explained that the division was equipped with 14 Springfield rifles fitted with unertl telescopic sights, sniper rifles, left behind by Marine units. Additionally, Ferry's regiment had 40 soldiers who had previously qualified as expert marksmen before deployment, making them ideal candidates for sniper training. Ferry expressed his desire for George to establish an official sniper section within the regiment to train these men in sharpshooting, to develop effective tactics, and to clear any remaining Japanese snipers from their operational areas. George accepted this mission but set a single condition. He wished to retain his personal rifle, his cherished Winchester Model 70. Ferry agreed to this request, and thus George was allowed to keep his trusty rifle. The 14 Springfield rifles with unertl scopes, meanwhile, would be allocated to the men he was assigned to train. The training program officially commenced on the 27th of January. George assembled 40 men at a makeshift shooting range located approximately 2 miles east of Henderson Field. These soldiers were already considered expert marksmen based on their qualification scores on paper, having trained using iron sights at ranges of up to 500 yards. However, none of them had ever gained actual combat experience as snipers, nor had any of them succeeded in killing an enemy from concealment or hidden positions. Thus, George began by teaching them the fundamental principles of dangerous precision shooting. He focused on critical aspects such as controlling their breathing to steady their aim, mastering the squeeze of the trigger to avoid jerking, and reading the effects of wind on projectile trajectory. He explained that the Springfield rifles they would be using weighed about 11 pounds, especially with the unertl scopes mounted, significantly heavier than their previous training rifles or George's own Winchester. While this added weight helped stabilize the shot, it also made holding the position for long durations physically exhausting. To compensate, George instructed the men on improvising support from their environment, using rocks, logs, or sandbags, because the jungle terrain rarely offered perfect shooting platforms. Snipers had to adapt creatively to the rugged landscape, often constructing stable stations from whatever materials were at hand. This training in support positioning, along with aiming techniques, would serve as the foundation for their skill development. The range training spanned a total of 3 days. During this period, George's students practiced shooting at stationary targets placed from 100 to 400 yards away, gradually increasing the difficulty. They advanced to firing at moving targets, then targets partially concealed behind vegetation and natural cover, conditions similar to what they would encounter in real combat situations. This comprehensive approach aimed to prepare them for the unpredictable and challenging environments in which they might serve as snipers, sharpening their ability to hit critical targets under diverse conditions. By the time January drew to a close, specifically by the 30th day of the month, a significant portion of the unit's riflemen, namely 32 out of 40, had mastered the skill of consistently hitting targets roughly the size of a man at a distance of 300 yards, even under the challenging conditions of real field operations. To maximize their effectiveness and ensure sustained accuracy, George systematically organized these skilled marksmen into 16 pairs. Each pair consisted of a shooter and a dedicated spotter, working together as a team. George was paired with a reliable spotter, Corporal Hayes, and together they set up their observation post on elevated terrain overlooking a trail frequently used by the Japanese for resupply runs. At precisely 720 hours, a Japanese soldier appeared on the trail. Hayes, through the binoculars, quickly confirmed the target's identity. George, taking careful aim, fired his rifle. The shot hit its mark, causing the soldier to slump to the ground. Immediately after, George worked the bolt of his weapon to chamber another round and scanned the surrounding area to identify additional targets. For that moment, no further enemies appeared. Over the subsequent 6 hours, George's team engaged with and successfully eliminated a total of 7 more Japanese soldiers along the same trail. In total, George's actions resulted in 7 shots fired, 6 enemies killed, and 1 missed shot due to the unpredictable influence of wind. The results were mirrored across the other 3 teams operating in the same area, all reporting similarly effective outcomes. That single day, a total of 23 Japanese soldiers fell, while notably, there were no casualties among American personnel. The sniper section, under George's leadership, continued their operations well into the early days of February. By the 9th of that month, their confirmed tally of Japanese soldiers eliminated reached an impressive 74. It is important to note that this count was conservative, as it only included confirmed kills where the bodies of the enemy soldiers could be definitively observed, ensuring accuracy and credibility. During this period, the Japanese forces' evacuation efforts accelerated markedly. Night after night, destroyer ships arrived to evacuate troops from Cape Esperance, located at the tip of the western Guadalcanal. American forces responded by advancing westward, attempting to intercept and disrupt the evacuation columns. Despite this, the Japanese soldiers mounted highly effective rearguard actions, fighting fiercely to delay the advancing Allied units. In this intense tug-of-war, George's sniper section was tasked specifically with targeting those Japanese soldiers tasked with covering the retreat routes, aiming to weaken their rear defenses and facilitate the broader American push. On the 7th of February, as George and his team were operating near the Tanamboa River, disaster struck. A Japanese rifleman shot him in the left shoulder. The bullet struck with enough force to spin George around and cause him to stumble to the ground. Rapidly, Hayes, demonstrating quick thinking and calmness under fire, dragged George behind cover and urgently called for medical assistance. Though the wound was serious, penetrating muscle tissue, the bullet narrowly missed vital bones and major blood vessels, preventing a more deadly outcome. George was quickly evacuated by medic to a field hospital located near Henderson Field. Medical personnel meticulously cleaned the wound and sutured it shut, ensuring the best possible chance of recovery. The doctors informed George that he would recover fully, but that he would need a period of rest and rehabilitation before returning to active duty, with no combat operations permitted for at least 3 weeks. George remained in the field hospital for 2 weeks, during which time the Japanese completed their overall evacuation of the Guadalcanal region. By the 9th of February, American forces reached Cape Esperance only to find that it was completely deserted, a testament to the effectiveness of the Japanese retreat. The campaign, which had begun weeks earlier, was now officially over. During those 12 days of active operations, George's sniper section had killed a confirmed total of 74 Japanese soldiers, with absolutely no friendly casualties reported during sniper duties. Their success and professionalism earned recognition from division headquarters. In particular, Colonel Ferry recommended George for a Bronze Star Medal, acknowledging his bravery and significant contribution to the overall mission. George's involvement in the war was far from over, even after he had sustained injuries and was recuperating at a field hospital. While he was still convalescing, a new set of orders descended from the highest command at the Pacific Theater. These orders were directed specifically to the Army's most seasoned combat officers, seeking individuals with proven experience in the harsh realities of combat. The mission was shrouded in secrecy, likely to protect strategic details from enemies and even to maintain operational security among the troops. It was to take place somewhere in Burma, a region known for its treacherous jungles and unpredictable battlefield conditions. The nature of the mission was classified, and no detailed information was initially shared with the officers involved. Recognizing the importance and the potential danger, George did not hesitate to volunteer for this new assignment, eager to serve and prove his mettle once again. By the time March arrived, George found himself aboard a large transport vessel, making its way across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean heading westward. This voyage symbolized a significant step in his military career, as he prepared for a clandestine and demanding operation in a remote part of the world. Carefully packed in a waterproof, shock-resistant case, his trusted Winchester Model 70 rifle was stowed safely in the cargo hold, ready for use once on the ground. Alongside it, the Lyman Alaskan scope was wrapped snugly in oilcloth, protected from the humid, damp environment they would face. Though he did not have full knowledge of the specifics of the Burma mission, George understood the broad outline. Its focus on jungle warfare, long-range patrols deep behind enemy lines, and conducting operations where supply lines were minimal or non-existent. The kind of mission where a man with a precise, long-range rifle, capable of hitting targets at distances of 600 yards or more, could be a crucial asset. The transport finally arrived in India on the 3rd of April. A group of around 200 officers, including George, assembled for a briefing on their upcoming assignment. They were to join a new, specially formed unit, which at the time bore no official designation but was already gaining a reputation among the men who would serve in it. The volunteers in this group fondly nicknamed themselves Merrill's Marauders, a name that would come to symbolize their daring and unconventional approach. Officially, on the 28th of May, 1943, the unit was designated the 5th, 37th, Combined, or Composite, Unit, but the men had been training diligently since April, preparing themselves for the challenging missions ahead. Their training was rigorous. They learned and practiced techniques for long-range penetration into enemy-held territory, adapted skills for jungle survival, and rehearsed operations that often would proceed without the usual supply support, necessitating self-reliance and resilience. This unit was modeled after the famed British Chindits, small, highly mobile forces designed by British Brigadier Ord Wingate, who specialized in deep behind-the-lines operations, often for weeks or months at a stretch. They could strike unexpectedly, disrupt supply lines, gather intelligence, and cause chaos behind enemy defenses. George was assigned to the 2nd Battalion within this unit. His official role was listed as a rifle platoon leader, but the truth was more nuanced. The Army did not formally recognize the role of snipers in its organizational structure at that time, meaning that George's skills with a rifle were not classified under any official sniper designation. Nevertheless, Colonel Ferry, who was in command, had seen firsthand what George was capable of with a rifle, an ability to pick off targets with lethal precision, skills he had demonstrated during previous campaigns in Guadalcanal. Training took place in central India, a land vastly different from the lush, tropical environment of Guadalcanal, but similar in its challenging terrain and oppressive climate. The principles remained the same: endure the heat and humidity, navigate dense vegetation where visibility was often limited, and move stealthily through terrain that favored the defender. The conditions in Burma, however, promised to be even more severe. The jungle there was characterized by steep, rugged terrain, heavy monsoon rains, and a dense canopy that made everything even darker and more difficult. The enemy, too, knew this ground intimately, fighting from well-camouflaged positions and understanding every twist of the landscape better than any American force. Anticipating the hardships ahead, George adjusted his equipment to better suit the demanding conditions of the Burma campaign. His Winchester Model 70 rifle had served him well during the short-range operations on Guadalcanal, where resupply was frequent and the engagements were relatively brief. But Burma called for a different approach: long patrols lasting for weeks, covering hundreds of miles through treacherous jungle. Every ounce of weight he carried on these patrols could significantly affect his endurance, so he made modifications to his gear. He removed the heavier Lyman Alaskan scope, opting instead for a lighter Weaver T-Series scope, Model 330, which maintained the same 2.5 power magnification but weighed approximately 8 ounces less. Additionally, he replaced the original wooden stock with a lightweight synthetic one. These modifications reduced the total weight of his rifle from nearly 9 pounds 12 ounces to approximately 8 pounds 14 ounces, a crucial reduction over extended patrols carrying around 60 pounds of gear and provisions. In February of 1944, the Merrill's Marauders, this elite, covert unit, began their advance into Burma. Their operational goal was to push through the northern regions of the country, where they would attempt to seize the Myitkyina airfield, a strategic installation vital to the Allied effort of supplying China through the Hump. Control of this airfield would have a decisive impact on the logistics and reinforcement of Allied forces fighting in the region. The Japanese forces defending Burma numbered around 4,000 soldiers, heavily entrenched around the airfield and the surrounding territory. The Marauders' plan involved approaching overland through terrain that Japanese forces considered nearly impassable for large offensive units, relying instead on stealth, speed, and surprise. They would move through dense jungle and rugged mountains, operating in an environment that was as impassable and dangerous as it was critical to their overall campaign. The rugged landscape was an unyielding labyrinth of towering mountains, rushing rivers, and thick, impenetrable jungle, leaving no accessible roads or well-defined trails for passage. All supplies and equipment had to be transported by sheer human effort, carried on the soldiers' backs or loaded onto pack mules that painstakingly navigated the difficult terrain. There was no option for motorized vehicles or mechanized support of any kind, and artillery units could not be moved forward. The only firepower available consisted of rifles, mortars, and the capacity to move swiftly through seemingly impossible environments. On the 24th of February, George's battalion set out on their arduous journey, embarking on a march into the heart of enemy territory. During that initial week, the troops covered approximately 83 miles, traversing a landscape characterized by mountainous jungle, often so steep and dense that progress was slow and exhausting. Many soldiers succumbed to the physical toll, collapsing from fatigue and dehydration, their bodies pushed beyond reasonable limits. Meanwhile, cases of malaria grew increasingly common with each passing day, as the soldiers battled not only the enemy, but also the relentless assault of disease. The pack mules that carried supplies also struggled to keep pace, often unable to climb steep inclines and occasionally breaking their legs on sharp descents, forcing the difficult decision to shoot the injured animals to prevent further suffering. By the beginning of March, the battalion had managed to push onward, covering a staggering total of approximately 217 miles. Throughout this relentless advance, they encountered Japanese forces 12 times. These encounters rarely involved full-scale battles. Instead, they consisted of skirmishes, ambushes, and quick engagements, often followed by rapid withdrawals to avoid prolonged contact. The Japanese units were not equipped or positioned to hold ground in these encounters. They were designed to move rapidly, harass, disrupt supply lines, and sow chaos behind enemy lines. In this guerrilla style of warfare, the Marauders thrived on mobility rather than static confrontation. During this hard march, George used his Winchester rifle 3 times. The first instance was at over 412 yards, when he took down a Japanese officer who was directing troops at a river crossing, a shot that demonstrated impressive marksmanship at long range. The second shot was at about 380 yards against a machine gun emplacement that was threatening his patrol. The third was at 300 yards against a sniper who had pinned down a neighboring patrol, causing chaos and jeopardizing their units. Each time, George fired only once per engagement, never wasting ammunition or exposing himself to danger unnecessarily. His Winchester's report was unmistakable, different from the sharp crack of a Garand rifle. Each shot from his bolt-action rifle announced his position with a distinctive sound. Knowing that a second shot might alert the enemy to his location, George had learned to act quickly, shoot, then immediately move to avoid retaliation. The march toward Myitkyina lasted for nearly 3 months, during which the Marauders pushed forward through increasingly challenging terrain. By late May, the unit had advanced over 700 miles into enemy-held territory. The toll of this campaign was severe. More soldiers succumbed to tropical diseases like malaria, dysentery, and typhus than to direct combat. Out of the original 5,300 men who had entered Burma, fewer than 3,000 remained, many of them incapacitated by illness or injury. On May 17th, after relentless operations, the Marauders finally succeeded in capturing the strategic Myitkyina airfield. The victory was significant, a symbol of their perseverance and skill, but it came at a high price. The unit was severely battered. Many men were killed, many more severely sick, and almost all had spent weeks living in the jungle without adequate rest or proper medical care. The toll was so great that the unit was no longer combat effective, its fighting ability diminished by losses and widespread illness. George survived the brutal campaigns in Burma, and his Winchester rifle, which had proved so effective during earlier actions at Guadalcanal, survived the ordeal as well. However, during the entire 3-month campaign, that rifle was fired only 7 times, reflecting the nature of the combat rather than any deficiency in its capability. Most of their engagements in the dense jungle were close-quarters ambushes or firefights within 50 yards, sometimes even less, settings where scoped rifles and long-range shooting were rarely practical. The thick, tangled vegetation limited visibility to perhaps 30 feet, so precision shooting at great distances was seldom required. Throughout those difficult months in Burma, George came to an important realization. The Winchester Model 70 he carried was an exceptional rifle, arguably the finest bolt-action sporting rifle ever produced. Yet the dynamic of modern warfare was shifting rapidly. The advent of semi-automatic rifles, like the Garand, was changing tactics, favoring speed and volume of fire over precision from a distance. Future conflicts would demand different weapons, adapted to new styles of combat. But for George, there would be no immediate next war. By June of 1944, he was evacuated with the rest of the Marauders as their operation concluded. The unit was disbanded, its members reassigned or sent home to recover. George was reassigned to training duties within the United States, and he would never again fire his Winchester in combat. He returned to America in July of that year, when the Army promoted him to the rank of captain and assigned him to Fort Benning in Georgia. From that moment onward, the rifle that had served him so well in the Pacific and Burma remained a treasured keepsake, a symbol of his experience, but it was no longer an active tool of warfare. George's professional life was dedicated to instructing young infantry officers in the art of marksmanship and small unit tactics, skills that were vital in the chaos of battle. George understood the rationale behind this shift. Modern warfare increasingly necessitated an industrial scale of organization and equipment. Yet, amid this transformation, something essential was slipping away. The individual skill, the craftsmanship that defined a true marksman, and the older idea that a single man, armed with the right rifle and proper training, could influence the outcome of a battle. When George was discharged from the Army in January of 1947, he held the rank of lieutenant colonel. His service record included receiving 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and earning the Combat Infantry Badge. Returning to Illinois, he pursued higher education through the GI Bill and enrolled at Princeton University. There, he studied politics, graduating with the highest honors in 1950. After completing his degree at Princeton, George spent 4 years at Oxford University in England. Subsequently, he spent another 4 years in British East Africa, immersing himself in regional politics and studying local institutions. Eventually, he settled in Washington, D.C., where he took on the role of executive director at the Institute of African American Relations. Later, he contributed his expertise to the U.S. State Department as a consultant and lecturer specializing in African affairs. Throughout those post-war years, George kept a silent lid on his wartime experiences in Guadalcanal and Burma. His colleagues knew he had served in the Pacific Theater, but few knew the details about Point Cruz, the Japanese snipers, or the Winchester Model 70 that sat safely in a case in his home. In 1947, compelled by a desire to preserve his memories, George decided to put his experiences into writing. It was not meant for publication but was purely for his own record, a way to document the weapons, tactics, and conditions of jungle warfare while the details were still fresh in his mind. He dedicated 6 months to writing, and as the pages accumulated, his manuscript grew to over 400 pages. A friend at the National Rifle Association, noticing the manuscript's thoroughness and detail, encouraged him to consider publishing it. George was hesitant. The content was highly technical, including detailed descriptions of rifles, ammunition, and ballistics, far from general reading material. Nevertheless, the NRA persuaded him, and in 1947, his work was published under the title Shots Fired in Anger. The book gained recognition among firearms aficionados and military historians alike, ultimately becoming a classic work in its field. The publication meticulously chronicled George's experiences on Guadalcanal and in Burma, presenting them with clinical precision. There was no embellishment, no attempt to heroize his actions, just honest, factual descriptions of what strategies and equipment succeeded or failed during combat. It was a straightforward account of lessons learned, exposing the gritty realities of jungle warfare, drawn from his personal encounters and observations. This work stood out for its clarity and depth, providing invaluable insights into the complexities of small unit combat and the vital role of individual skill in warfare's chaos. The book continues to be in circulation even today, cherished as an essential reference by collectors and military historians who study the various small arms employed during the Second World War. The detailed descriptions provided by George about Japanese weaponry remain among the most comprehensive and precise accounts available from contemporary sources. Living through a remarkable span of history, George witnessed the United States engage not only in the Second World War, but also in 3 subsequent major conflicts, namely the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Gulf War. Throughout these tumultuous decades, he observed the remarkable evolution of military firearms, from the trusty M1 Garand to the more advanced M14, and eventually to the versatile M16 rifle. He also saw the formal recognition of sniping as a specialized military discipline, complete with dedicated training programs and specialized equipment designed specifically for that purpose. In addition, George watched how the lessons learned during the Second World War were continuously revisited, questioned, and refined, as new generations of soldiers carried forward and built upon that knowledge to improve tactics and skills on the battlefield. John George passed away on the 3rd of January in the year 2009, having lived to reach the impressive age of 90 years. Among his many enduring contributions is the Winchester Model 70 rifle, the very firearm that had once played a pivotal role in eliminating Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal during the war. This rifle was eventually donated to the National Firearms Museum located in Fairfax, Virginia, where it now sits safely displayed in a glass case alongside an informational plaque outlining its storied history. Interestingly, most visitors tend to pass by without stopping, often unaware of its significance. To the casual observer, it appears to be just another vintage hunting rifle, but in reality, it is much more than that. This particular firearm exemplifies how a skilled individual marksman, equipped with a mail-order scope, managed to outperform professionally trained military snipers, setting a new standard of marksmanship. It is the very rifle that successfully cleared points on the Guadalcanal front within 4 days, a feat that an entire battalion struggled to accomplish in 2 weeks. More than just a piece of history, this rifle fundamentally altered the American military's approach to individual marksmanship in the context of modern warfare, highlighting the importance of skill at the individual level. If this story resonated with you, just as it moved us deeply, I ask that you do a small favor. Press that like button. Every single like sends a clear message to YouTube to recommend this story to more viewers, helping to preserve these forgotten tales. Consider subscribing and activating notifications, as we make it our mission to recover and share stories from dusty archives every single day. Tales of riflemen who demonstrated exceptional skill and extraordinary courage. These are real people, embodying genuine heroism, not just legends from history books. Please leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else? Our community is truly global, spanning across continents and cultures. You're not merely a passive viewer. You are an essential part of keeping these memories alive. Share your location with us, or tell us if anyone in your family has served in the military. Just let us know that you're here and engaged. Thank you sincerely for watching, and thank you for helping ensure that John George's legacy does not fade into silence. These men and their stories deserve to be remembered, and with your support, we can keep their memories alive for generations to come.